Welcome to Workplace Psychology with Dr. Martha Greidick. I'm Dr. Martha Greidick. This podcast examines a wide variety of work-related issues through the lens of industrial and organizational psychology. And while many of the topics discussed here may be seen as intended for white-collar employees and their employers, in reality, the ideas presented here are applicable across organizations and industries. Additionally, many of the topics discussed here may be applicable outside of the workplace. I encourage you to examine what's presented here, apply what makes sense to you, and simply discard the rest. Greetings, everyone. It's Dr. Greidick here. I want to remind you that my new book, The Stress Solution, is out and available on Amazon. I'd like to recommend that you check it out. The link for that is in the description below. If you are someone who is interested in finally mastering your stress management efforts and managing the stress in your life and its effects in an effective way, this is a great read for you. We are all dealing with stress, and stress is not something that will go away. It's part of life, but it's what you do with that stress, how you handle it, how you manage it, what you do to combat its effects on you. That's what matters. And in this book, The Stress Solution, you will learn what it takes to finally master stress management, what it takes to learn and apply the kinds of skills that you can take with you on your life's journey, skills that you can use for the rest of your life to help you to manage stress successfully and effectively, so that even though stress will always be part of life, it will not be able to affect you negatively, and you will be much more successful in navigating stress and its effects on you and your life. So check out The Stress Solution by Dr. Martha Greidick, now available on Amazon. When it comes to defining your success at work, there's more to it than meets the eye. There are a number of variables to consider before we can actually define what success is when it comes to you and your work. First and foremost, let's start by realizing that the definition of your success at work comes from multiple sources. First, there's you, first and foremost, but there's also your employer. There are certain things that your employer considers as part of your individual success within the organization. And beyond that, there are also individuals who contribute in their own definition or their own understanding of what your success is at work. So the idea of a comprehensive definition means that we have to combine the variables, the inputs from these different sources in such a way that it works for everybody and that it truly defines your success at work. Let's start with your own definition of your success at work. We start there because it's one of the most important things. If somebody else defines success for you, but it doesn't agree with you, it's not how you would define your success, then it really means little or nothing as far as you're concerned. So let's start with how you define your own success at work. Now, before you dive into that, let me just remind you that how you define your own success at work isn't necessarily the same as how you would define somebody else's success at their job. You may have, and you probably do have, different standards for yourself and different people. Oftentimes, Your standards for yourself may be more stringent or more difficult to achieve than what you would expect of others. But the opposite could be true too. You may be a little more lenient when it comes to how you define your success, but when it comes to someone else, maybe your children, maybe your coworkers, you may be a little more tough on them before you can actually say that you consider them successful. So, when defining what it means to you, how you envision your own success at work, let's not worry about how you envision anybody else's success at their work. So let's separate those two, because if we start to mix that up, it can get a little bit messy. So right now, the first thing to do is to define your very own success for yourself. What does it look like for you where you can feel successful at work? There are many things to consider here. When you look at your own success, when you define your own success, you could align with some variables more than others. It's going to be a little bit different for everybody. So how do you consider your success in terms of maybe a title within the company, or a rank, or steady advancement within the company, or as far as your career goes? What about things such as responsibilities, things such as money? All of those will fall somewhere on a scale of not important to important. And again, it'll be a little bit different for everybody. So when you define your own success at work, consider those different things and how important they are to you. How much do they contribute to your idea of your own success? Keep in mind that your list of variables may be longer or shorter than somebody else's. You may be more focused on things such as level of responsibilities or maybe longevity at the company. Somebody else might be more focused on titles or formal recognitions. Another person may be all about career advancement and upward movement within the company, or money. So don't get hung up on what anybody else thinks is right for them. Think about what you consider to be right for you as far as defining your own success at work. Once you define your own success or your idea of success at work, we have to consider your employer. This is something that absolutely has to come into play. If you consider certain things to be part of your success at work, but none of them match up with what your employer thinks is how they define your success at work, then that could be problematic. So let's look at, how does your employer define your success with the organization? How do you do that? Well, you have to talk to your employer. You have to have that conversation, probably more than one conversation. How does your employer define your success within that organization? What does it mean to your employer for you to be successful? What does it look like? What kinds of variables, what kinds of things come into play? The two most important inputs when it comes to defining your success at work, when it comes to figuring out that comprehensive definition, will come from you and your employer. It's about finding what works for both of you, finding that happy medium combination that is meaningful for both you and the employer. Beyond your own definition of your success at work and the definition contributed by your employer, there are also different individuals who have some kind of vision, some kind of definition of what your success at work looks like. Those individuals could be people such as your boss, your manager, or if you are in management, it could be people who work for you, people on your team. It could be your colleagues, but it could also be people outside of the workplace, family members, your friends, other acquaintances within the same profession. So you have to be open and It may be helpful to be aware of how others define your success. However, be very, very careful not to get hung up on other people's ideas of your success, especially people outside of the organization. While it's good to know what others consider to be a successful experience for you at the workplace, it's a good place to get ideas from others when defining your own success, but it shouldn't be something that drives you. It shouldn't be something that limits you. Your success should be mostly defined by you, but also shared with the definition that your employer has. Other individuals can be contributing, but should not be deciding factors, with the exception of your boss, perhaps, right? That's an individual, but that can also be considered when we look at the employer or the organization. How do you figure out these different definitions of your success at work? Well, when it comes to your own definition, you may want to sit down and think about it and write things out. Write out some ideas, some considerations, some pros and cons to the different variables that maybe you come up with in terms of what would be considered as part of your success at work. Thoughts on short and long-term success, how it affects you today, how it will affect you in the future, how it affects your professional life, how it affects your personal life. So those are the kinds of things that really deserve your attention and your consideration as you sit down and define what success means to you as far as your success at work. The easiest way to find out what your employer is thinking when it comes to how they define your success at work is to talk to your employer, talk to your boss, talk to maybe multiple people in management, people with whom you have regular contact, people who have the ability to promote you, to move you within the company, to move you within your career. So communication's one of the easiest ways. But once you figure out what your definition is and what your employer's definition is of your success at work, now the work is to find that happy combination of the two. Hopefully, your definition and your employer's definition are somewhere in the same vicinity, that they're not worlds apart, because if they're completely different, it'll be a little more challenging to make it work for everybody so that you feel successful at work, but also your employer feels that you're successful within the organization. So once you have the information, the definitions as you see it and as your employer sees it, that's when the work begins, combining or coming together in a comprehensive definition of what it means for you to be successful for yourself and within that organization. And as I already mentioned earlier, it's also good to consider other people's definitions, but don't get too hung up on those. They may be a little bit more about them than you. So they're good as a source for ideas, but don't let them stop you or trip you up. Focus mostly on your definition of success and your employer's definition. When you have a good idea of how your success at work is defined, when you have that comprehensive definition that is shared by you and your employer, you can make bigger, more meaningful decisions with that information. Decisions about your career, decisions about your time with the employer, whether you want to stay with the organization, whether you feel it's important to move on to a different organization. Those are all important things to consider. After all, we spend a lot of time at work, so it's important that we know whether or not we're successful and then are able to make decisions to help us with whatever we want to achieve and experience in terms of our work. It's not difficult to see that the responsibility when it comes to an individual's success at work is shared both by the individual and the organization. However, I want to remind you as the individual employee that it's absolutely up to you to start that conversation, both for yourself in defining your own success at work, but also start that conversation with your employer. They may or may not have the time or the inclination to approach you with that conversation. So it's up to you to get those wheels moving. Something else to keep in mind is that your definition of success and your employer's definition of your success may change over time. So it's something that should be revisited on a regular basis, whether that's every 6 months, every 12 months, whatever the situation makes most sense to you and to your employer. But keep that in mind. Just because you achieve this comprehensive definition that suits both you as an individual and your employer doesn't mean that this will be written in stone and never change. It may be long lasting, but it doesn't have to be. There's no guarantee with that. So just be prepared and be aware of that and be willing to revisit it as needed. As this episode comes to an end, let's review what was discussed. Being successful at work is important, but it means different things to different people. What we have to remember is that a true comprehensive definition of your individual success at work will be a combination of different variables, including your own personal definition of your success and the definition that your employer has as far as what it means to the employer, to the agency, the organization, for you to be successful within that organization. It is the combination of the two that allows us to have that encompassing, comprehensive definition that hopefully makes everybody happy. A good place to start is to figure out what it means to you to be successful at work. Once you have that figured out, move on to having the conversation with your employer. Hopefully, the two definitions are not far apart so that they can be brought together in a comprehensive, effective way so that you can be successful at work while feeling rewarded individually and making sure that the sentiment is shared by your employer. As the week unfolds, I encourage you to think about what does it mean for you to be successful at work. So often we take on other people's definitions in terms of so many things, but including success at work. Oftentimes these definitions are never customized, never revisited or revised, and oftentimes they lead to a feeling of something lacking and not quite true for you individually as far as what you really would consider to be a successful experience at work. So why not take some time this week and think about how do you define success at work and see how aligned you are with what your previous or existing definitions may have been. From there, start the conversation with your employer. Make sure everybody's on the same page, or at least in close proximity. For those of you who experience this podcast in an audio-only version, I encourage you to check out my YouTube channel, Stress Free with Dr. G, where you can find the video version of this podcast. The link for that is in the description below. In addition to the video version of the podcast, you can also find videos that focus on stress management. So I encourage you to check it out. Stress Free with Dr. G on YouTube. Thank you for joining me today. Please subscribe to this podcast. I look forward to seeing you here again next time. Until then, I wish you joy and well-being.